Hi, everybody. This is Pamela Donnelly, and I'm delighted that you're here with us. And I do want to just take a quick second to say welcome, Jeff Morrow. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm great, Pamela. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to spend some time talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I think you and I spend most of our careers, and in fact, I think between the two of us, we've got over 40 years of combined experience. So, yeah, let's share some of that insight to help these families. I know that the moms and dads out there and the teenagers, they lean in with such expectancy. They know there is this sort of maze ahead of them, and they're trying to figure out how to get through it. And they know it's basically a competition, isn't it? I mean, these kids are competing for a spot at the table with universities becoming much more competitive. In fact, right now we've got about, in the last 15 years, 108% increase in college applicants at the same time that we have a 15% decrease in admissions to the same schools that might have admitted that student with those test scores, with that GPA, even several years ago. So it has become more and more competitive. And so it's a time for strategy, isn't it? It's a time for parents to equip themselves and their kids with what they need to know. So we're going to start in this webinar. We're going to cover basically financial aid angles that are going to help parents, some tips, some actionable items. So if you're, sitting there and you don't have a pen and paper in front of you, you might want to go grab it, because we're going to give you some information here that is going to be really critical to fulfilling your mission to launch your students successfully. I know that there's a lot of confusion out there, so we're here to provide clarity, and it's certainly an exciting thing to be able to demystify something that I know for most people is pretty confusing. So yeah, let's get started. Jeff, you and I were talking earlier about the fact that most of our students that we meet with do know that there's this thing called a FAFSA. But what they don't know is that the need-based aid is only one of three buckets of money, types of money that they can get for college. So let's begin with this first most familiar one. And why don't you speak a little bit to the FAFSA and what families need to know?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. The FAFSA is funny because I think, like you said, most people will have heard the term before, whether or not they understand what the acronym means. And it's the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And what it is that it's the gateway, is what it is that it's the gateway to need-based financial aid. So any of the other types of aid that you see listed here, the Pell Grant, the Stafford loan, the direct loan, the PLUS loans, are all gateways, or all aid that you can get by using the FAFSA. And generally, you cannot have access to any of that need-based aid unless you fill out the FAFSA. And we've seen a real shift in the last couple of years in terms of when the FAFSA is due. Historically, you would get that, you could fill out your FAFSA, an online application, on November the 1st to be turned in or filed on January 1st. The shift in making the federal application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, due earlier in February, or in October now, in October, is really in an effort to serve students and their families. So you're able to turn in that FAFSA in October now, and you use the prior year. And so it really has kind of changed how colleges are awarding money and how they're looking at need, and changed a little bit of the access to these other kinds of need-based aid for the better, we're hoping. This is a brand new program, but for the better.
Yeah. And what I want to point out here as well is that the FAFSA, the way that these funds are often given is on a first come, first served basis. So the early bird gets that worm, and, you snooze, you lose. Please, parents, make sure that, October 1 is when you want to. So if you've got a rising senior, you want to begin just having that on your awareness. So, oh, wow, October 1, this is when that FAFSA needs to be dealt with, because that is how they're going to determine your aid. And I will point out as well, there's a difference between a grant and a loan. A grant is something that does not have to be paid back. A loan is money you have to pay back. We have reached $1 trillion in student debt in this crazy country of ours. And we love America so much, but I have to say, I think it's unfortunate that so many families lack the information that we're giving in this webinar, so that you don't get confused about where the money is that you will not have to pay back and how to do that. So we're going to talk about that in pretty great detail here. The FAFSA you must fill out, absolutely everybody. And here we go. There is a formula that you need to know, and I'm going to give you some lingo today. So you're going to just jot down this little equation. So COA minus EFC equals need. What does that mean? Well, the cost of attendance, you've got to remember when your student is going off to college, it is not just the tuition, nor is it just the sticker price. So we're going to talk later in this webinar about the sticker price of college and how to get that price lower. To be able to know the housing, the fees in advance, really the full cost, and also to factor in if your student is across the country or a couple of plane rides away, even that cost of them being able to travel home for holidays and special occasions. All of this impacts your pocketbook. So you have to be thinking about the full cost of attendance. Don't get sidelined in only looking at what they say the tuition is. Then the EFC is your estimated family contribution. Now that means that the federal government has decided, hey, you need this much money if you're going to go to college. And then we may determine that you have a need, right? And there's this idea of gapping, right? What is the gap between what you can afford and what actually has to be paid? Different universities, some are very, I think of them as green light schools. They have a lot of green and they're very generous. Others are not so generous. That information is access that you need to have. And really experts are the ones who can guide you in determining where are the colleges that are the most generous with that need. To know that you have what is needed, take a look at these action items. So first of all, you do want to find out, hey, what percentage of need does your school cover? I do want to recommend that students are the ones asking this. It's always easy for moms and dads to kind of barrel ahead. And, there's we see it in the news a lot. I know New York Times did an article on helicopter parents, and people talk about tiger moms, and we give all these names. And, I'm a mom of 3. I've got 1 out of college, 2 in high school. And Jeff, I know you're a parent as well. None of us feel like we are helicopters or wild, ferocious animals, but we do care about our kids. But now is a time, and this is just something, I really give as a, little tip from my heart to the parents out there. We're trying to launch our kids to independence, not codependence. This is a time for your student to advocate for themselves. So communicating this with your student, honey, this is what we need to know. Why don't you take the lead in this? What percentage of need does that university that you want to target cover? Let's find that out together. That adjusted gross income is also this is where some people get confused, and they may think that there could be an ethical conflict here. It's like, oh, we're going to change the numbers, we're going to modify. Jeff, I know we were talking about that earlier. We were talking about the fact that really there are ethical, strategic ways to get an advantage here, aren't there?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's not about moving money around or being misleading. It's the same way that when you strategize for filling out your taxes, that you want to make sure that that you are maximizing the tax that you owe versus what you're receiving. And I think applying for financial aid is the same way. And understanding things like gapping is so critical, because I think that while what we're doing, the first part of this webinar, is very pragmatic about being strategic and planning, there's also a philosophical portion of this too, is that understanding what the gap is and understanding exactly what you're going to be responsible for covering helps you start to evaluate the value of each place and understanding not only what you can afford, but what you should afford. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later as well, but I think it's really critical to look at this strategically so that you can be an informed consumer of your education, the same way that you research anything else that you would buy. And the idea that so many students are financing so much of their education these days, and especially when we've got laws in this country where your student debt is the only debt that can't even be taken care of by bankruptcy.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
It is an epidemic. And so the idea is that the idea is not to just blindly accept that you should pay whatever education costs, but to evaluate it, step back and say, what am I getting? What is there to gain? What is the value of this? And knowing that asking those questions doesn't mean that you think education is any less important than you once did. It still is incredibly important. But you want to make sure that you're not mortgaging your future. Because if you mortgage your future, you will not be in a position to make the kind of contribution to your community that you'd like to make. The reason you're getting an education in the first place.
Oh, it's beautifully said. I always remind our students that college is not about what you get. It's about what you're here to give.
Exactly.
And I love the idea that, as they determine whether it's what they're going to major in, where they're going to go, what career path they're going to choose. And a lot of them, as we know, they're undecided as they go in. They're determining, a lot of them vast majority change majors as they get in, because of course they're still figuring it out. They're 18, 19 years old. But at the end of the day, who they are in this world and what they're here to give to this world really can be so intrinsically connected to having the right fit college. And really, we're not just here about elite schools, although we love all kinds of schools.
Sure.
The reality is the right fit school is what's going to launch your son or daughter to the best possible future.